All right. Episode 16 in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back to the Noel Casler podcast. This is episode 16. We're glad you are listening. We appreciate all the support. And once again, I'm back here with my main man, Jimmy Kennedy, to break down the week's events. How you doing today, Jimmy?
Great, Noel. Thanks, as always, for having me, buddy. I'm about 20 minutes away from Mike Pence now. He's back home again in Indiana. He's got a crib that's worthy of like MTV Cribs, man. Over 10,000 square feet.
10,000 square feet.
Yeah. So it's got a in-ground pool and an indoor basketball court. You know, that's as Indiana as it gets.
Yeah.
And it's about 20 minutes outside of where there's a golf course that has previously hosted like the BMW Championship and it hosted the PGA Championship in the 90s when John Daly won the championship there. So very, I live in a pretty upscale neighborhood north of Indianapolis, and that's where Mike is now.
Wow. Well, the boys are back in town then.
Yeah, I mean, look what doing the bare minimum gets you, But Mike shows up for 4 years and he gets a multi-million-dollar home. So
corruption pays, baby, His brother gets to go to Congress and vote against any sort of, investigation into January 6th.
Yeah. And while there's a gallows, showing up at the Capitol meant to, hang Mike Pence at the, you were talking about this week that Joe Biden wants to just move on a little bit from what went on with the 6th and also Trump's meeting with Putin at G7 last time.
Yeah, that really got under my skin. One of the Democratic leaders that sat on that committee, I guess the Foreign Affairs Committee, I can't think of his name right now, but he had been pursuing the minutes from that meeting in Helsinki in July of 2018. And he just gave up this week. He said, we're no longer pursuing, getting this information. Biden wants to move on. And I don't know if that was a directive from Biden himself, but I think it's just sort of the general mood in the air, and they have other irons in the fire, so to speak. But like, that's
right.
Not something we want to let Trump get away with. Of anything that bothered me when he was president, it was his relationship with Vladimir Putin, because I saw firsthand that he was dealing with the Russian mob in Trump Tower. I mean, the Celebrity Apprentice after parties were like all Russian mobsters. We shot it at the end of May in New York City, right? These dudes would show up in their SUVs with their like 25-year-old girlfriends in like fur, like wearing fur coats and stuff. And then you'd go to the after party. We had one at Trump Tower, Trump Soho, actually, one year when we taped it at Skirball, which is a place down at NYU. And Felix Sater worked for Trump at the time. And Felix Sater would like work the after party. And it was literally like all these Russian businessmen, and tough looking guys. And Felix would just walk around the room making introductions between Ivanka and Jared. And at this time, like, I didn't care. There was nobody had a crystal ball thinking this guy was ever going to be president. He was just the guy who chose Bret Michaels over like the completely qualified African-American woman. He was just like the racist buffoon who snorted his Adderall and, asked you what his daughter was wearing when she arrived, but their entanglements with the Russians are legion now, and now it's all been documented. So it surprises me they wouldn't want the meetings of that or the minutes from that meeting. And if you remember, when he was leaving for that event, the press stopped him. It was one of those chopper talks, and they were like, what are you and Putin going to talk about? And he's like, it's none of your business what I talk about with it. It's like, no, it is our business, dude. It's exactly our business. You're sitting there representing the free world against our greatest adversary. Then he has the meeting, right? Takes the minutes from the interpreter when it ends. Everybody who follows me knows what my opinion is on that. I think Putin pulled out a laptop, or an iPad and said, look, remember this? Remember Maria? Remember Svetlana? Remember, all these women and girls that Trump had abused for decades in the brothels that he allowed to move into Trump Tower. And they basically gave him a frequent flyer pass to, and the dumbass would go up there or go downstairs rather, because he's at the top of the building, and, help himself to the trafficked human beings and abused them with impunity. And he's dumb enough to not realize that Putin would have been taping him, because he taped everybody else. And he's that dumb to like think like he's going to get away with it because he's in business with these guys. So I literally, honestly think that that's what Putin showed him, because when he walked out of that room, he was a beaten man. He was ashen, you know, and I've been around the guy, obviously. He walks around with his chest pumped out all the time. You know, he looks like a drunken minotaur or something most of the time, you know, a drunken centaur. They all have that weird thing where they push their chests forward like the Suns do it. You know, it's like S curve in their back. It's like how the Trump men stand. They're taught that from when they're little kids. This is how a Trump stands, you know. And when he came out of that meeting, he was slumped over. He was down to Putin's height. Putin's 5'7", right? Trump is 6 foot, and he wears shoe lifts that make him 6'4", so he can lie about it, you know. But he's not 5'7", you know. And he was that day, and he was ashen. And he came out in front of the world press and said, "I believed what Vladimir, you know, told me, that they didn't interfere in the election." And you can see Putin smirking. Putin's just like, this dumb son of a bitch, you know? And I think he made him say it. I think he was like, you're going to say this or else, you know? And it's not a P tape. You know, everybody thinks it's just, Trump is a violent man. He's a sadistic, violent man. You know, he ripped out his own wife's hair, like, and raped her. You know, that's his wife, like the mother of his children. The guy's capable of really gnarly, really mean things. And of all the stuff he's gotten away with, I just said the Russia stuff bugs me. That really bugs me. You know, the fact that he was a sexual predator for decades in New York City, and it was no secret, but his name was on the side of the building, and he was a wealthy white man, and nobody wanted to ruffle feathers. They still don't, right? Yeah. You still don't hear people talking about it the way they should. You had a 13-year-old girl accuse him of beating her up and raping her, you know, a 13-year-old on multiple occasions, to the point she told the madam, "Don't send me with him anymore. He's too rough." Because that's who Trump is. He's abusive. You see him when he was in press conferences with women. So the fact that our national press didn't have the stomach to chase that down is going to haunt our nation in our consciousness. Someday we will come to terms with that. Someday the truth on him will come out, and it's going to bug people when they hear it.
Well, and I saw that Hillary Clinton did an interview on Morning Joe this week, and she was talking about when she had dealt with Putin, that he had kept the rest of the global leaders waiting, you know, for 45 minutes. And I'm like, well, there's a Trump tactic right there that he would utilize. But, you know, going back to what happened at the G7 with Trump and Putin, you know, if one of the reasons why they're not pursuing this further is that they don't want to piss off MAGA and his followers, that's part of their brand, isn't it? Just being angry about everything. I mean, at this point, how do you hold anyone accountable for anything if you don't try to pursue this?
Well, yeah, exactly. And it's not like you're going to win over the MAGA supporters, you know. And
right.
By the way, Trump always keeps everybody waiting. As you mentioned, he never kept Putin waiting. He was early for Putin, and Putin kept him waiting, and Trump didn't mind, which is so telling of their relationship, because everybody in his life he kept waiting, you know. But anyway, so that's where it is. You know, he gets away with everything. You know, that's the deal with Trump. Everybody's like, justice is coming. It's like he turned 75 on Monday. Okay. Justice isn't coming. Okay. Justice sailed away a long time ago. You know, the guy was a money launderer who got to become president of the United States after bankrupting casinos, you know, after failing in over 50 businesses with his name on them, from steaks to water to escort agencies. You know, the guy already got away with it. Yes, he may end up going to trial for financial things. They'll probably just go after the company. He'll hire big lawyers. He'll tie it up in the courts. He's not doing some satisfying perp walk. And even if he does, he's a former president of the United States. Okay. He's not going to be on cell block D getting his ass kicked by the other inmates. Okay. I promise you that.
Well, and you know, we saw that story a few years ago. There's been so many things that have happened since then, but like the college admissions scandal where Becky from Full House went to prison. You know, I feel like it would be something like that. You know, it would just be, even if he did go to prison, it would be the country club of prisons.
Yeah.
Which is what yeah.
You know, prison is prison, though. Well, it's not. That's not true. You know, there are some rough. My mom went to prison. My mom was in one of those country clubs. They call it Camp Cupcake, the same prison Martha Stewart went to. My mom was there like well before Martha Stewart, but
Okay.
there, it's still prison. And that was, that's Alderson, West Virginia. So it's not it's not, it's not a rough and tumble place, but you're still losing your freedom. But yeah, he'd be in a country. He's a former president. Like, they're not sending him to prison. I'm sorry. It just ain't happening. If they had an appetite to send him to prison, they would have gone after the sex crimes. They would have gone after the vice crimes. They'd look at his drug use. Ronnie Jackson today just called for Biden to have a mental health check. Okay. Because he's not all there. Ronnie Jackson is about as disgraced a human being as you could get. He's the guy who said Donald Trump was the healthiest male he'd ever seen, who had lived to 200 if he only ate better. Ronnie Jackson was known as the candy man around the White House. He would go on the White House flights and hand out Ativan, which is like, it's a benzodiazepine. It'll get you high, baby. He would get drunk and be an asshole to female subordinates. Like, the guy's a lush, right? But what happens? He has to leave the White House because of all this stuff, right? Because Trump tried to make him like the Surgeon General or something. It was another appointment, but Trump tried to give him some big appointment and they wouldn't let him have it. So he sort of had to like leave the White House when all this scandal comes up. And then he fails upwards. He becomes a congressman. And from where? Texas, right? And let's talk about Texas for a minute.
Yeah.
Because every time I bring up Texas, a lot of my replies, people are like, stop talking about Texas. We have Democrats here. No shit. Ann Richards from Texas, Lloyd Benson. A lot of my heroes are from Texas, LBJ. Not to mention all my favorite songwriters, and Larry McMurtry, who died this summer, who's my all-time favorite author. I love Texas. I love Texas culture, from Guy Clark to Steve Earle to Towns Van Zandt to the food. I've been a Texas a ton of times. I love Texas. Y'all are messing up when it comes to politics. And I know there's a lot of Democrats there, but your two senators are lunatics. Okay. You're giving us Ted Cruz. You're giving us Governor Abbott, who's trying to build his own wall now on the border of Texas. So I understand your frustration. I do political satire, okay? My tweets are political commentary. They can't take in all points of view all the time in 280 characters, okay? So when I slam on Texas, I'm trying to draw attention to the larger issue of how bad Texas is messing up. And you guys have drive-by and like mass shootings on a weekly basis now. You had one on Saturday night, right? Somebody told me like not to mess with Texas last week. That's it. Don't mess with Texas is the theme, but don't ever talk about us on Twitter because we'll get too sensitive. It's like, no, stop it. It's your governor. You had the Democrats stood up to the Texas legislator 2 weeks ago when they tried to pass yet another voter restriction bill, which they're going to get away with next time they're in session. They just couldn't get a quorum that day because these guys showed up, these Democrats bravely showed up on Memorial Day weekend and stopped it. But that bill will go through. Texas will be one of the hardest places to vote in the country, and you get these macho, toxic, Dan Crenshaw. Like, are you kidding me? They fall for cartoon characters, and they got Beto O'Rourke, they have good choices. Beto should run for governor, but they're going to make damn sure like he can't get elected. Okay. So Texas has been hijacked by these like evil little white men, Ted Cruz being at the top of that list. The guy put out a video this week when he's saluting, the flag and pledging allegiance. Ted Cruz is the definition of unpatriotic. He's a cynical white man who went to Harvard, okay, who gets a bunch of rubes to believe in him because he fries a piece of bacon on his AR-15. Okay. As soon as the temperature dropped below 60, he was on a plane to vacation in Mexico this winter. And then he called in the police to help get him off the plane back to his car because he was so scared of the press. Okay. That's not a macho man. That's not a patriot. That's somebody who's waving a flag because he thinks you guys have bought this bullshit dogma that you've been taught your whole lives that a pickup truck, an American flag, and a fucking gun on your holster makes you a man. It doesn't. Okay. Stop with the bullets. Stop with the guns. It's not rugged individualism. It's idiocy. Okay. So people in Texas need to stop this because we're tired of dealing with it. And it's not just Texas, it's Florida that's now sending their police to Texas, but I get tired of people like, don't talk about us. There's good people here. Yeah, no shit. There's good people everywhere, and good people are dying, and good people are losing their right to vote, and good people are losing their children and wives and spouses in mass shootings every day. So don't worry about getting offended. Make it stop. Surround your state house and get Governor Abbott out of there. Don't stand for this. Don't let Ted Cruz represent you.
Well, and the most disappointing thing about it, I mean, I remember pretty soon after Biden was inaugurated, they had the whole crisis at the border thing. They have to create a new crisis once any kind of stability arrives in the White House. And, Ted Cruz was leading the charge in the army boat, looking like, Fidel Castro in his green getup that he had. And there was a time when he called Trump a pathological liar, and said to vote your conscience at the 2016 RNC. And don't think I forgot, Ted, that you called a basketball goal a basketball ring. Okay. It's one thing to say that anywhere across the United States, but it's another thing to say it in Indiana. And that's just plain embarrassing, my friend. You embarrass yourself in a basketball state, and it still bothers us as a Hoosier. So,
Ann Richards, a friend of mine, used to work for Governor Ann Richards, and she was just one of the greats of all time. And she used to call George W. Bush Shrub. That was her nickname, right? But when he was campaigning, and I like him now, obviously his administration was a disaster, but Trump was such a dumpster fire that it made me look fondly on George W. Bush, which I never thought would have happened 20 years ago, but here we are. So I don't think he's a bad man. I think he was not the sharpest tool in the shed. And, Dick Cheney, he was no match for Darth Vader, right? But he was a good guy at heart. He certainly was nothing like Donald Trump. But anyway, when he was running for governor of Texas, he was involved in like an outdoor debate with another Republican candidate. And it was on somebody's cattle farm, right? And he had to, a ranch, right? And he had to get out of there. And somebody gave him directions like, how do I get out of here? And they're like, oh, you go down this dirt road, make a left. When you get to the cattle guard, you make another right and you'll be on the highway. And he goes, okay, what kind of uniform is the cattle guard wearing? Cattle guard is a fence, that cattle can't walk across. Right. It's like in the ground and their hooves get stuck in it,
That's almost charming in comparison to, like that's almost cute.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is a funny thing that always stuck in my head. What kind of uniform will the cattle guard be wearing? But anyway, so I love Texas, but my point is people are real sensitive. They don't want to take responsibility for what happened. And as long as I've been speaking out on Twitter, I've come across this because I'll say it's us because we're all in this together. We're all Americans, and Trump divided us, right? And that's because that played to his advantage. A divided house will not stand, and his job is to break us and destroy this place. And we have to realize we're all in this together. So we all allowed Trump to be president, and when I say that, like, we let him get away with this, people will be like, we didn't. I voted against him. I'm part of the resistance. Okay, you have a hashtag in your Twitter handle. Okay, he still got to do what he wanted to do for 4 years, flew off to his golf club after attacking the Capitol, and he's still walking free, right? So that's on all of us. We did let him get away with it because we all live under this thing that I'm always talking about, where these wealthy white men sort of are seen as our rulers, and we just listen to what they do and say and somehow don't hold them accountable. We find it real easy in this country to lock up, a 15-year-old black kid because somebody said he might have stolen a backpack and thrown him on Rikers Island for 3 years, in solitary confinement. And like we were saying, you're right, all prisons aren't created equal. That's hell on earth.
Right.
They have a barge right now in the East River that they're keeping people on. It's a barge, a big boat. And it's just walled in with metal and steel. And these people are in there at like 100-degree heat. It's a nightmare. Texas is a nightmare. Your prisons in Texas are a national disgrace. John Oliver, one of my heroes, did a
piece. He just did a piece on that, didn't he?
Yeah. And the Texas people are like, well, we don't want to make them too comfortable. You don't cook them alive. And that's what you're doing. So it's that attitude. Like, stop that. Because you're living in a state where that's coming from, and you can't just say, well, I didn't vote. No, those are your friends and neighbors. Those are, somehow human beings are are being raised in this country to think that racism is okay, to think it's okay to cook people alive because you're calling them criminals and you're locking them up. And most of those people sat before judges in Texas that were imminently corrupt. Goober Pyle or whatever the hell his name is. Who's the Gobert, right? Louis Gobert was a Texas judge, Gomert, whatever, right? He was a Texas judge. How many innocent people do you think that guy sent to jail?
Man, no kidding.
Just put on his glasses. You're black. All right, go. And then they send you to jail. It's 150 degrees inside of a cell block, literally. So let me just finish. Like they're torturing people. And they're creating a climate that is going to keep feeding this insanity. It's going to keep feeding the QAnon. When I spoke out about QAnon hosting a thing in Dallas, some lady started this like DM with me, like, where does it say it was in Dallas? I sent you the article. Well, where does it say that the city signed off? It doesn't matter. It was the Omni in Dallas. It happened in Dallas. She wanted to do everything to not own the situation and still defend her state because she didn't believe in what was going on in it. And that's fine, but it's still happening in your backyard, right? So you have to take responsibility for it. Just like we all have to take responsibility for what happened in this country. Just like we're all now finally taking responsibility as a nation and we're having some visibility. Tomorrow's Juneteenth, and it's finally a federal holiday. Wonderful, 150 years too late. But it's finally being recognized. I mean, it boggles your mind that we're waiting this long, that it's 2021 and it's just now a federal holiday and people are still against it. The Republicans were like, well, that's too confusing because we already have the 4th of July. You know what? If you wanted Trump Diaper Day, it would be a holiday. Trump said he would have been having holidays for himself if he stayed on. He would have been like, it's Ivanka Day and then it's Eric Day,
Well, and you brought up the problem of like prisons and the heat. It reminded me of when Sheriff Arpaio, wasn't that the guy? He was from Arizona, right? And he ran a similar kind of system where he would feed prisoners like rotten food and force them to wear pink clothes. Like it's a cruel and unusual punishment that was handed out.
Yeah, and he made him sleep outside in the desert, in tents. Mm-hmm. I know people who actually ended up in his jails, but and he was a big Trump guy, right? Trump would do all his support against the guy, and Trump loves that. Cruelty is the point, that's the theme, and people buy into that. They think, oh, that's justice. We're going to be tough, and we're not going to stand for this injustice. Meanwhile, the people that are doing that are always the most corrupt people. What happened with Joe Arpaio? Corrupt, right? Had to leave office. Corrupt. You think these guys in Texas? Corrupt, right? That's what they do. They want to punish other people because being a sadistic ruler helps consolidate your power. That's what Putin is about, right? Putin is holding on to power right now because anybody who speaks up against him gets poisoned or thrown out of a window or thrown in jail or tortured on live TV. And Putin met with Biden, and some people are happy about that. And some people are like, you just legitimize the guy and his terrorism on the world stage. I fall into the latter group. I don't see this as 3D chess. Like, I think he should be cut off, but that's just me.
Yeah. And I think too, one thing that frustrates me, even though it's good to acknowledge Juneteenth and what happened, we're kind of skipping some steps, aren't we? I mean, there's active anti-voting legislation going into effect right now. I mean, it's kind of like getting a coffee cup and calling it a promotion. I mean, yeah, good that it's, acknowledged, but we do need some voter protection to actually give it some meaning.
Absolutely. Yeah. You also need reparations. You need to pay those people for the work that they did. Pay the Americans that are just as much citizens as we are for building this country, and being enslaved at the time and generations of discrimination. You should pay for that. If Jeff Bezos doesn't have to pay income tax, if Elon Musk doesn't have to pay income tax, then you can afford it, right? You can afford to give them billions off of their thing. Take that money and give it to people, give it to the victims of the Tulsa massacre, of Rosewood, of all these other things that we've been discussing here every week. Yeah, you can have a holiday, but like pay the bill. The bill is due. They've done that in other countries, They've measures to do that in Australia and Canada and stuff, and we're catching up. But it's not the end of the discussion. You don't just put a thing on a calendar and it's a wonderful thing. I'm not taking anything away, but we need to pay reparations, and nobody wants to hear that. I don't care if they don't want to hear it. There needs to be a check in the mail.
Yeah, and one guy who celebrated a birthday over the weekend, gone far too soon, was Tupac Shakur. And he was talking about the injustice that's been handed down to people of color throughout the history of this country, and that they're only going to get more frustrated the more that you delay actual justice. So let's actually implement something that has real effects. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that Georgia passed a law that it was illegal to hand water to somebody. Doing the Christian thing was illegal for a state when it came to voting.
Absolutely. And there'll be a lot more laws like that. That's what I'm talking about. There's laws on every state now that has a GOP governor or a sympathetic person in the county government or the state, the state attorney and the state administrator, what's the Secretary of State. Anybody who has a Republican Secretary of State is going to have some kind of recount, which they're doing on the Arizona recount. They've got the ballots in a cabin in Montana right now. People's private ballots from Arizona are sitting in a cabin. The only thing that should be sitting in the cabin in Montana is that's where the Unabomber went, right? Like that's not where ballots from Arizona should end up, And you mentioned Tupac, we were the same age pretty much, and Tupac was in Baltimore originally, lived in Baltimore, and then obviously went to Oakland, and that's where he came up. I met his mom, Afeni Shakur, who was a Black Panther and a very astute political activist. I met her at the VMAs with Biggie Smalls' mom, Violetta Wallace, and it was on the same event. And this was late 90s at Lincoln Center at VMAs, and they were coming together to kind of give out an award and stuff. And it was kind of a sensitive thing, and they let me handle it. And it was awesome to meet them. I love Tupac and Biggie, but yeah, speaking the truth. A lot of people have said that, and a lot of people don't want to hear it because you want to think, well, that's the history. Why dredge it up? Because unless you acknowledge the past, you're doomed to repeat it. And that's what we're in now. We never really owned what we've done. We've never owned our original sin as a nation, with enslaved people, with Native Americans. You got to make that stuff right. And we didn't. We put people on reservations. We put people in prisons. We put people at the back of the line in terms of economic growth and education, and we made it as hard as it possibly could be to get ahead. And people prospered and got ahead anyway, but not enough people. But it's like we're always talking about, the scared, mediocre white man wants to hold on to power. They want to let Matt Gaetz go to Congress because his dad was the president of the Senate in Florida. Matt Gaetz, as I said before, you could tell that guy was a screw up in college. He was getting his DWIs. He's not somebody who should have ended up a state senator and then a U.S. congressman. And it looks like next week he's going to get indicted. That was the word today, is that they're finally going to press charges against him, which will be awesome. He'll be a sacrificial lamb in a way, it's probably Roger Stone who dropped a dime on him to begin with, because it also distracts, then that becomes the whole news cycle. Not that he doesn't deserve to be, but as I've discussed a lot, he's doing what Trump did, for 20, 30 years in New York.
Well, and the difficult thing, when you look forward to, you mentioned Republican governors and secretaries of state trying to implement different things. There's an active case right now in Indiana where the people are suing the governor for the additional benefits that they just rejected. They didn't want to even have it handed out to the people. And having a dad who worked as a self-employed musician, that extra $300, is beneficial to anybody that would need it. But again, the GOP is not about empathy in any sort of way with the kind of policies they're implementing.
Absolutely. And a lot of the Republican governors turned down the extra $300 check. They turned it down in Texas too, because cruelty is the point. And they're mad that people aren't showing up and working low wage fast food jobs. That's the other thing. How do we exploit everybody as capitalists if we don't have the fodder to keep our machine going? If we don't have people that are going to show up for $7 an hour and work a 10-hour shift behind a 200-degree fry machine, handing out poison to a bunch of people for $5 a pop, because that's the other thing is the guys own those businesses. That's crap. I know a lot of people have to eat fast food, but it kills you, which is the other reason they don't want universal health care and stuff. People don't want that because, again, cruelty is the point. What do I care if this guy dies of a heart attack when he's 55 because he's been eating cheeseburgers and French fries, because the big companies that feed all this, you're ranching, as I got into last week with the Koch brothers. I mean, that stuff's inhumane. McDonald's is inhumane. Burger King. These are terrible companies. I know people eat it. This is horrible shit. This is poison. It should be regulated like cigarettes, right? And the people who run these companies, they need people to work. And I worked at McDonald's when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and there's nothing wrong with it, but like, you gave people a little benefits and a year off, and they're like, hey, maybe I don't have to go work at Hardee's,
Right.
maybe I don't have to take a bus to Jack in the Box, and still not have enough money. But these Republican governors, they want that cruelty. They don't want people getting a leg up. That's what I say with the Koch brothers. That whole libertarian Tea Party thing is designed to keep a constant influx of workers. That's how capitalism works at a big industrial level. That's what the Industrial Revolution was like. The Carnegies and all these dudes, the Rockefellers, these guys owned factories that used up humans and kicked them back out. And you'd work for the company store and you'd get a voucher and you'd buy your kids some shoes with a voucher and you'd live in a little shack on the property that the company owned, and you couldn't quit and you couldn't get ahead. All you could really do is get up and go to work every day. And when you died of black lung when you were 40, your son was now 18 and he would take your spot. Meanwhile, the guy who owns the place, buys a couple libraries and names them after himself and feels like he's a big time philanthropist. They're making that fortunes off the backs of the workers, and that's why do you think they talk about socialism so much, and out, they're not really against socialism. These guys sit on golf courts all day long, golf courses, right? Only 12% of the golf courses in this country use recycled water. Okay. The rest of the golf courses use municipal water systems. They use potable water that the city or towns they're in provides. Right? That's socialism. That comes from tax dollars. That's who put those pipes in there, right? You're using it to water those greens that you're driving around in your golf cart talking about anti-socialism stuff, right? Trump's family built their whole fortune off of FHA loans. His dad literally built all those buildings because he was getting no interest loans from the government as part of the New Deal, right? He was building homes for returning GIs after World War II. Socialism. The GI Bill, socialism, the thing that got you a house in the suburbs, that got you to the point that now you got a Ford F-150 and some welding skills or whatever it is you do, socialism. Somebody got a leg up here because of because of being born in this country. But as again, you can give these taglines and people buy it. They buy it because they're dumb. And I don't mean it to insult you. It's just they haven't had a chance to see reality. And Fox News is giving Putin talking points. Putin literally just backed up Sean Hannity's claims yesterday on state TV in Russia. He's like, it's working. What I'm saying is working.
Well, and it's like you said, man, it's only socialism if it helps the poor. They trying to reverse the ACA this week. Thankfully, the Supreme Court was able to uphold it. And the ACA isn't even socialized medicine. It's a pro-business deal. And there's no public option available to, a citizen of the United States right now. But, the ACA is a protection. And that's why Obama put it in, because he said, your job's not coming back. So I'm going to make sure that you can get access to quality health care and get training for that job of the future. It was paving a road for the future of America.
Yeah, and the other irony is, like, it got struck down in this latest case. I mean, 3 times I think they've tried to take it down in the Trump era, but it got struck down the other day because they'd already taken away the penalty, and the Republicans signed off. So now it's a $0. There used to be a penalty, like if you didn't join, you'd get this big tax penalty. They already got rid of that penalty. So their whole case this time was that it hurts people because of the penalty, and there was no penalty. It's now 0. So they were able to be like, oh, no, and they struck it down. Thankfully, that's very popular. ACA is popular. It gives people health insurance. It's insane. It's just more of the same. It's more of the same stuff. You know, I don't even want to talk about these idiots anymore. Ask me some better questions. What do you want to talk about, Jimmy?
Well, I was listening to John Legend today. He was one of the artists that I was listening to. Have you ever worked with John Legend before?
A zillion times.
Yeah. What's your take on John, man? What kind of guy is he behind the scenes?
John's a great guy, smart guy. Went to University of Pennsylvania. Not that an Ivy League school makes you smart. He's a very cool guy. The first gig I ever did with him was the Latin Grammys in Houston, and he was just kind of coming on the scene. And because he came out of Chicago, the kind of Kanye like association. And I remember him coming into this dressing room. I brought him in, and he asked me for like a pen and paper, and he wrote out his chart for the music he was doing. He wrote out the musical chart, which it was, again, you don't see very often. I was like, this guy knows his stuff. Great performer. I did a bunch of Super Bowls with him because he'll show up at anything. I mean, I've done a ton of gigs with him, and obviously I'm friends with his wife because I was escorting her a bunch. Chrissy, who follows me on Twitter, who quit Twitter, but I like her. I knew him before she came on the scene, and
right.
They're a nice family. One of the most impressive things I remember him doing is there was a benefit that he was going to go to at the Beverly Hilton. And he found out on the way there that the group was like sort of anti-LGBTQ. I forget the specifics, but they had done something, that people raised eyebrows and said, these guys are, they're not down with the cause, and they heard about it and turned the limo around, turned the car around and said, we're not performing tonight, and tweeted it out. Said, we're not going to be there because this group is not, is anti-gay rights, and we don't want any part of it. So they put their money where their mouth is. And the last time I saw them in person, we were probably at Carnegie Hall. And I remember I was sitting in this chair on stage right, and Chrissy Teigen came and sat next to me, and she was pregnant. She was like real pregnant, and she sat next to me, and I'd escorted her before. She was cool with me, and like, I kind of stayed sitting there, though it was awkward. I was like, I need to get up now, but I didn't want to be real self-conscious about it, And then one of the sort of talent bosses was like, no, get up, And I was like, okay. And I get up just as John Legend's coming over, and he's like, no, don't get up. And I was like, no, please take the seat, And he would barely take it, but he finally did. And I got out of there because I didn't want to stay sitting next to her, But she's cool. Like, he's definitely cool. Super talented, super it's got his head on straight. He knows what matters. A great musician, fun guy.
And I think I thought I heard that he graduated high school. I mean, he obviously went to Penn. You mentioned that he graduated high school at like 12 or something like that, and he's got the baby face to match it. Yeah. Another guy I was listening to today, over the weekend, I'll be listening to him, John Mayer, another guy that I really like. He's had an impressive dating record. I wasn't always a fan of his music because Dad didn't particularly like him. But have you worked with him at all?
I have friends who work with him still. A good buddy of mine is still his road manager. Same thing. I mean, any pop star I've worked with. Last time I saw John, he was playing with Dead and Company. He's back out there playing this summer, and he's a monster guitar player. Very funny guy. He's got a great sense of humor. He came out and did a benefit I do with Stephen Stills, or used to do, called the Light Up the Blues. And it was a benefit for children with autism. And he came out and did it one year, just killed it in this sound check. And then we were sitting in like catering afterwards, and he was just cracking me up, and he's funny, like comedian level funny. As you know, he performs with Chappelle and stuff. Like, he knows what he's doing. Well, when I first met him, I was super jealous of him. When that would have been the Grammys in 2003 at the Garden, when he just came on the scene, and he was a pop singer. Like, nobody even knew he really played guitar at that point. He was just like sort of writing pop songs. And I have friends who went to Berkeley with him and stuff. So he was very arrogant when he was young, and he'll be the first to admit it. He was a very arrogant guy. But that's when I first came in contact with him, when he was dating Taylor Swift and just anybody, he saw on TV, and who he wanted to date, he would date. But he's mellowed. He's certainly a talented guy, and he's certainly funny. I was jealous of him that night when he won all the Grammys and stuff. But no, he's a good dude.
Yeah. And I was thinking about, because it's Father's Day weekend this weekend, and I was thinking when you mentioned the sound check, one sound check that my dad saw get done. He saw Billy Joel pretty soon after Bobby Knight had thrown the chair. Remember that situation where he was playing and he threw the chair across the floor? Well, that night Billy Joel like threw his piano bench across the stage to try to relate to the crowd, and he said that Billy Joel's sound check was like the most impressive thing ever. That he sat down at the piano, started playing a full Beatles song. One Beatles song got over, bass player walked in, they start playing again, until eventually, the whole band's playing, and then the sound guy goes, "Thank you," and it's over. Like it was the most impressive thing that he's ever seen. Just that Billy was able to hammer those out, one after another.
Yeah, and he can do it
Yeah.
drunk off. He can do it so drunk that he can't even talk, but he can sit down at the piano. I've been there for a lot of Billy Joel gigs. I got friends who work with him too. I love Billy Joel. Great guy, normal guy. Like I see
Yeah.
out in Sag Harbor and stuff in the summertime. And if you're standing next to him waiting for a table at a restaurant, like he's no big deal. I was there with him. We were trying to get a table at a restaurant a few years ago with a friend of mine who works on the Super Bowl with me. It was my boss on the Super Bowl, actually, and
Oh,
his
cool.
wife. And we had Billy open up the Prince year. When your Colts played, Billy sang the anthem that year. And
Okay.
so we were like, Billy's behind us, and I was like, let's say hi to him. You worked with him. I've met him a bunch, but I was like, come on to my friend, like say hi to Billy, and
Yeah.
he didn't even want to do it. But Billy like wouldn't, he no star trip with that guy, and he takes care of his people wonderfully. Um, if you work for him, you're very generous. His main, I shouldn't say the names of any of these people, but one of my very, very, very good friends who trained me in the business is Billy's security guy. And I'd go see him all the time. Like every time Billy plays the Gardens, I could have tickets if I want. And I've been there a lot for those garden shows, and they're
Cool.
just incredible. And I've sat in sound checks with him. We did a sound check once for the 12/12 benefit and the Sandy benefit, which was this big rock thing we did at the Garden. And Billy doesn't drink so much these days, but he is a drinker.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the big time, and he was kind of drunk for this sound check, and he was up there with Springsteen, and Bruce was just cracking up, because Billy was just obviously like hammered, but he could sit down and play that. A friend of mine was the tour manager when he toured with Elton John, who's sober and one of my main heroes. I mean, Elton John's music to me is like, it's awesome. I was just listening to some Elton on the way back up to the house today. Like I've worked with Elton too. Like I love his music. And they both toured together, and Elton's sober for a long time and Billy isn't, and kind of feel bad for, Billy when he used to drink. And he would come back to Springsteen's shows. He'd come back stage sometimes and just finish a bottle of scotch, like in a sitting.
Oh, wow.
So, and smoke cigars. I don't know why I got on this tangent, but thankfully he's, he's gotten that under control, and it never affected his performance. The guy, Billy Joel's the kind of guy who would have been famous in any era. He's like
Right.
a Cole Porter type. He could write Broadway show tunes. He knows a ton about music. If you ever listen to him talk about classical music, you'll learn a ton. He did a behind an actor's studio episode once with James Lipton, who passed away this year, who I also knew. And it was one of the most educational things I've ever seen in music. And I'd
Yeah.
write songs, I've always written songs, and Billy is like the guy you want to study with. So national treasure. But what was so my buddy would give me tickets all the time to see these Billy Joel concerts. And we were on tour together, me and this same guy, when I worked for another band with Crosby, Stills, and Nash, right?
Yeah.
This guy's an ex-cop, NYPD guy, right? And we're in Germany with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And in Germany, like they don't sell guns. Like you can't go buy guns like you can everywhere in America. But all the stores have these like pellet guns that look really real, right? They have all these pellet guns that look super real. So we're out shopping, and this, like, we see these guns or whatever, and we're back at the hotel later in the day, and the guy's like, hey, I bought you one of these guns, to have in your hotel room, like to
Yeah.
do target practice or whatever. And me, I'm not a gun guy, but it was a nice gesture, and I'm like, okay. And I shot a couple pellets at the trash can or something, And then the tour ended and I was like, I'm not getting on a plane with this gun, that looks completely real. Because the point is they look just like these it looks like a real gun. It doesn't have the orange thing at the end. Like it's something you pulled it out, you'd get shot. People would think you're holding a gun. So the guy takes the gun and flies back to the United States for me because he's an ex-cop. He can like put it in his bag or something,
Right.
So he's like, I'll give you the gun some other time, after the tour ends, right? So this guy works for Billy Joel. And when the Super Bowl was in New York, I don't remember what year, but we did a Super Bowl with your boy Bruno Mars at Giant Stadium in New York. And next night was like a Monday night. I went to see Billy Joel play at the Garden. And this guy gives me like front row VIP tickets. And it's not just like there's the front row and then there's like Billy's VIP front row. So you're close enough that like his sweat is flying on you. You're literally looking right. He's got this special section for family and friends kind of thing, So I'm in the front row of front rows, and I brought a buddy of mine who loves Billy Joel, who just couldn't believe, that we got led all the way to the front and backstage passes and all this. And my buddy I know comes out right before the show starts and gives me the gun because I hadn't seen him. And he goes, here, here's that thing from Germany, and he gives it to me in a bag, it's actually a Trump bag, like, because they were staying at a Trump hotel. It was like the, laundry bag or something. And he like hands me this gun. And I'm like, I'm sitting here at the front row of Billy Joel concert with like a gun on my lap. Like they're going to think I'm some crazy dude, because then he leaves and goes backstage. I'm like, I have a gun. Like, what if they say, what's in that box or whatever? It's a very bizarre situation. It's hidden in my barn now. But anyway, I always think of that with Billy Joel. All right, so let's get back to politics. That's enough celebrity talk.
Let's see what else is going on. We've talked about the ACA remaining constitutional. I mentioned the story about Governor Holcomb in Indiana trying to take away the extra money. What else happened? Was there anything else?
There's all kinds of stuff happening all the time. The world is melting,
Well, and you mentioned like fast food. One thing that really makes me, you got to think about the advertising that you see every day. There's a reason why a Big Mac's only $4 and a healthier option's like 12. The less healthy option is the cheaper option because it also supplies, it keeps people sick, so the treatments continue to flow. Like it's like you said, it's a system that keeps people sick and keeps them unhealthy.
Absolutely. And it keeps big business propping it up, and it's cheap and it's addictive, it's salt and fat. Your body craves it when you eat it, and it's okay as a treat every once in a while, but it's horrific for the environment. It's horrible for your body. It gives you diabetes. There's enough sugar, in just one of the sodas that they give you at those things, but you're right. It's expensive to eat healthy. It's super expensive. So, and that's something, we got to address. Reagan came in and said ketchup was a vegetable. He cut the school lunch program. And kids are going hungry in this country. That breaks my heart. You want to talk about celebrities, like Springsteen would always make sure that we had like a local food bank was able to collect money at his concerts. And that was one of my responsibilities, is that before the concert, I would go out and meet whoever, because he would switch it up. So it'd be City Harvest or somebody else, he spread it around. So everybody got a shot to make some money. And so when we did these shows at the Garden, I would meet the reps from these charities, and they'd set up a table in the hallways of the Garden, so when 30,000 people stream in, they put a buck or two in the buckets, and they'd make some good money. And I always loved that, that he cared enough to feed people in a way, because people are going hungry. It's summertime now, kids are without a meal. If you eat on the school lunch program, you're going hungry in the summertime, and there's people trying to address that stuff, but not the Republicans. The Republicans are trying to, in Missouri today, they just signed a law saying that any police departments that tried to enforce federal gun laws would be blocked and brought up on charges, right?
They can't do that.
I know it's going to be challenged in the courts, but they're trying. That's the insanity of it. Why not feed the hungry children in your state? There's a lot of them in Missouri. Missouri is one of those bellwether states. It sort of has all the problems that you have on a national level. It has corrupt politicians, like we just talked about, the worst of the cynical, Josh Hawley is as elitist little punk as you're going to get. And he pretends like he's taking on big government on behalf of the good folks in the Ozarks, right? He's not. He's a scammer, and but we saw the Mikulskis or whatever, that couple that pulled the gun on the Black Lives Matter people that be marching by, that St. Louis, and that guy's running for like Senate now. They just had to turn in their guns. The judge just ordered this week. They have to turn in their guns and have them melted down and pay a fine. But the guy's running for Senate or something, some political higher office, because he got famous. That's the thing now. He achieved my pillow guy status, right? The other thing that Trump offered is he let other people bask in his celebrity, because his celebrity was enough. A lot of those people were going to Trump rallies just because like that was a famous person they were seeing in real life. It's like, look, there's the guy from the TV. Bring the kids. Oh my God, he's right there in front of us, and Trump knew that. He knew they were showing up to sort of bask in the celebrity. That's why the lights were up high. That's why he did interact with them as best he could. He'd shake the hands and wave at them. He knew that sells. He's always known that. He's got a P.T. Barnum element to him. It's all about that huckster self-promotion. So anybody in his orbit got to bask in that too. So the Mikulskis or whatever their names are got to see the MGTs and the Lauren Boeberts, and all these other folks. There was a Navy SEAL that Trump pardoned, right? This guy was like, his own Navy SEALs hated this guy because he was such a sadistic killer. I don't remember his name, but there was a big case a couple years ago and Trump pardoned him, if you remember, right before Christmas, and then invited him to Mar-a-Lago at Christmas. Trump was making a celebrity out of this guy who was basically a serial killer, right? He was unfit to serve and a disgrace to the uniform and murdered a girl, like an Iraqi girl. He was a horrible human being. Trump brought him to Mar-a-Lago and made him a celebrity. Trump knows what he's doing with that kind of stuff. First of all, it's a sadistic guy, so Trump gets into that, and then he owns them. You know what I mean? He creates these soldiers in these politicians. And you started the show talking about Mike Pence. Mike got that. Mike isn't a dumb guy. You know what I mean? He's a corrupt guy without any morals, but he's not stupid. He knew he couldn't go up against Trumpism. He knew it would be too much. That's why he didn't say a word about them coming after him. Pence could have gone after Trump at any point in the last 4 years. If anybody could have like pulled a Brutus move, and stabbed Trump in the back, it was Pence. He could have been like, I've seen this guy, folks. He is snorting Adderall. Like he is on drugs. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. The guy doesn't even show up to the, Oval Office until noon. He's sitting up there watching Fox News all morning. Like he doesn't even understand like basic fundamentals of government. Pence could have literally taken that guy out at any point, and he could have pulled together some conspirators, but he didn't do it. He didn't dare do it because he realized that the power that Trump wielded that ties in with this celebrity was so big, it was already too late.
Well, and having been a former Hoosier under his reign here as governor of the state, his priorities were about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which made it that was the challenge of if somebody has some kind of religious tradition where they don't if they ask a bakery to make a cake for a gay couple, they're able to deny that business. That's where our priorities are in the Hoosier state for at least during Pence's time, and it's been a continuation under Holcomb. But that shows you where the GOP is. It's about legislating hate. We saw it in Florida a couple weeks ago with DeSantis and the anti-trans legislation that he signed. It's everywhere.
Anti-trans, LGBTQ, because bigotry, homophobia, racism, that sells to the base, and it sells to the white Christian Southern base really well, because that Christian ideology makes you feel like you're above it. Guess what? Christians owned enslaved people, all those people that own slaves consider themselves, Christians too, right?
Like all in the name of God.
Right. You're owning a human being. You think you're owning a human being. You can't really own a human being. You could just break a huge law and own and trade enslaved people. You never really owned them. You just tortured them. You just committed a huge crime that should be set right. And it's not just a holiday, as I said before. There should be reparations paid. We should take a hard look at what this country does. Go look at the prisons. Look at what the people look like in there. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're mostly people of color. They're mostly poor white people. They're people that went through trauma. They're people that went through abuse. That come from broken homes and addiction and stuff. And I come from that. I had an out. I had a family that was still together, and like parts of my family they were all very well educated. Even my mom, who fell into drugs, and had to go to prison. But she was a white woman. She went to prison for 5 years or something or less, went to a nice prison because she'd never committed a crime and got out and got sober and, went on with her life. Okay. But a lot of people don't get that chance. And when my mom was going to prison and I was a little kid, I remember visiting her in the Baltimore City jail, right, for Christmas once when she was on her way to prison. And all the other kids in there weren't white. You know what I mean? And I was like, these kids are screwed. Like I knew instinctually that, like, though I had a tough road ahead, these kids had an impossible road ahead, because we don't have any support system for that. And when that happened to my mom, it was somewhat of an anomaly. Now it's commonplace, not commonplace, but now the numbers are hugely, like, expanded in terms of mothers that are locked up in prison with children on the outside, because of the drug laws, because of the war on drugs, because of poverty. Like, it's an issue we don't want to talk about in this country because people are ashamed of it, and I get that. But you have to, these are human beings. You were talking about yoga. Like, where you need yoga? Prisons. Where you need pets and therapy animals? Prisons, right? We have shelters full of cats and dogs that don't have homes, that nobody loves in this country. What better place? Put them in those prisons. Let those people heal. Let them love and take care of something. Obviously you get psycho killers, like not everybody, but I have a feeling the prisoners would police themselves in that regard, because they'd be happy to have the dogs and, the cats and stuff. And like, they saw somebody mistreating their animals. It would have to be supervised, but, and certainly some people you just always want in prison. Like there's always going to be, like, Jeffrey Dahmers and like Jack the Rippers and like insane people, but people that just never got a fair shot, and got addicted to drugs. I'm not excusing their crimes, but you don't torture people and expect it to be better. And that's become the policy. You get these private prisons, they crop up in these Republican states. The state government is all for them because it brings jobs to the community, and they get to say, hey, I brought 1,100 jobs to, Fayetteville, elect me as governor, but the job is just warehousing poor people and people of color, turning them into gladiators and letting them get tortured in prison, letting them do as many drugs as they did on the outside in prison. Some people get sober in prison, but it's hard to do. You need to treat this stuff. You need to treat PTSD. You need to treat, like, trauma. You don't, because we're all in this together. They're alive. We're here at the same time. Ella Fitzgerald, one of my favorite singers ever, was just confronted with tons of racism. And there's a great documentary on her at PBS. I watched it again last night, and who's the other guy, Tony Bennett, who I've worked with too. Tony Bennett's a great guy. Another show, I'll tell you about Tony Bennett. But Tony Bennett saw all the racism that Ella had to deal with, and I think one time Ella said, we're here at the same time. That was her answer for all this injustice and how African Americans were getting treated in this country. It's like, we're all here. You don't think God put us all here, like, to be brothers and sisters?
Right.
You know what I mean? Do you think the higher plan is really for us to all be like hating each other and trying to get a leg up on each other all the time and lock each other up, and think that other person is the enemy? It's such a base, unevolved, stupid waste of this very precious little bit of time we have on earth. Life must feel long, but it ain't that long. Jimmy, it's Father's Day. on Sunday.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Is
I
this
do.
first father without your first Sunday without your father?
Second one.
Second, okay.
Yeah.
And he's
So
proud of you, but it doesn't last forever, right? It's a blink of an eye, even if you live a long time. If you look at the length of the world, I got a tree outside my window that's been here since 1850 or something. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
that tree was planted when Lincoln was president. All right. There's probably a lot of people come and gone since then. It was even before Lincoln was president. But my point is, why waste time being against another human being? Why waste time trying to fight another human being when you could be helping them? That's all those teachings are like, turn the other cheek, right? There's all these Christians you talk about. Where's turn the other cheek? You're lock up the key, build a wall, shoot them, shoot on sight. What's the stand your ground?
Right.
How about turn the other cheek, Christian Southern white male, woman? What are you so scared of?
How am I going to use my AR-15 if I turn the other cheek?
Exactly. And that resentment is a sickness. That's what it is. It's a sickness. It's fear. And that we have to address that. We have to address it as a nation. We should probably wait till another episode, but like the Sackler family did more damage to this country, than any terrorist. The opioid epidemic in this country. Sackler's owned Purdue Pharma that made OxyContin. That stuff flooded this country in the 90s when it came out. 2000s, it ravaged, it filled up those prisons, right? But those are, white corporate Americans. And yeah, they had to go bankrupt, but all their assets were protected. A judge in White Plains just continued to protect their assets. They got away with it, and then they get to put their name on the side of the buildings. They got the name on the Guggenheim, which is next to my place in the city, they took it off now, I think, but they got the Sackler wing. That's the thing. You could do horrible things to people, but the people that own those companies put their names on a museum or something, and it's somehow excused. Charles Koch was a big donor to museums and stuff. No, let's think about what you're doing. The Koch brothers were poisoning the land, air, and water of this country. They still are. They were using people as human fodder. They had market-based management, which basically was like, if a pipeline breaks, it costs more money to stop and fix the oil leak than it does to just take our chances and keep the oil running. But when it leaks, it floods 1,000 acres and kills all kinds of wildlife and poisons our earth. They didn't care. It's about $1. Same thing with the people that owned, Purdue Pharma, the Sackler family. They knew it was poisonous and killing people, but it was big business. And when you make big business, you get big friends, right? You get your Joe Mansions. You own McDonald's, you get to buy politicians. So they don't talk about hey, maybe we should study this crap that we're feeding everybody. Maybe we shouldn't make it look good to kids and have cartoon characters selling it. And I grew up in the 70s where you lived on that stuff. All we ate was chemicals. I don't even think I had a glass of water until the 90s. How everybody hydrates now? There was no hydrating in the 70s. You drank Kool-Aid. You drank shit that was purple and green. You know what I mean? And soda. But it wasn't good for you, and it still isn't, but we know better now is my point, and you got to look at all these big companies and all these people selling poison, and you got to look at the society underneath that's propping it up, and who are the victims of this. You got to, nobody wants to look at prisons. Nobody wants to be compassionate towards prisoners.
Well, and at the end of the day, it's who profits from the suffering, the privatization of prisons. That's been a huge problem. And you think it's not a coincidence that Trump brought in Kim Kardashian, of all people, to head up the prison reform thing? She's a celebrity.
Exactly.
She's famous based on a sex tape. For better or for worse, that's how she got her fame. So Trump's going to latch on to the same kind of fame that launched him, because he has a reality TV base that feeds on that stuff.
Exactly. And look, now her stepmom is running for governor in California and will eat up all the airtime on Fox News. How much has Caitlyn Jenner already been on Fox News? They're going to lap that up, right? Because it's she's crazy. I'm all for
Yeah.
the fact that I was singing her praises when she transitioned. I think that's a wonderful, brave thing to do, and it'll be a big step forward. In many ways, it is a step forward because it shows you like everyone's equal. Even trans people can be complete lunatics. Nothing to do with their transition. She's just an asshole, right? She's just a greedy, rich, out of touch person who wants to now take advantage on that Trump plan. Hey, I'm famous. Maybe the next step is real power. And people whisper in their ear. They don't always come up with this on their own. It's their buddies that are like, hey, you should run for office. You got this shine on you now, because then they can do the favors for the constituents at home. She was talking about her hangars. She goes, the guy in the hangar next to me said he was moving to Arizona because of all the homeless people in California. Like that's her base. She's running on billionaires who don't want to look at homeless people. No, take care of the homeless people. I'm New York City based. You should see my city. It's falling apart. There's people sleeping out on the streets. There's food lines that are ridiculous. We got Maya Wiley running. That's who I'm supporting for mayor. June 22nd is the primary. I think that's this Tuesday. I haven't looked at a calendar. It is this Tuesday. The Foo Fighters are playing Sunday night at the Garden. Next time I'll tell you some Foo Fighters stories. But my point is you have to, like we've said before on this show, we have to start approaching things holistically. We got to look at the things we don't want to look at. We got to start looking at people as human beings and not policy issues, not ugly things we think we can legislate away because we don't want to look at it. Because we're only as well off as the worst, least among us are. Yes. How do you sit in a big fancy $20 million apartment on Park Avenue when you know that somebody's sleeping on the street outside? I mean, a lot of people do it, but it bugs me. When I'm in those sort of positions, and I am, a lot, it bugs me. And I always try to be grateful for having the basics. And, too many people don't have the basics. They don't have a decent shot at a happy life. And now we have this division that's been run down the middle of our country where it's us, them. That's why you see people riding on the highways, cutting everybody off, not just in their pickup trucks and their sports cars. What's the deal? Every car now has to sound like it's like the Blitzkrieg. Like you're going to give somebody a heart attack with that noise. Where's the aggression? What is this sense of like, hey man, maybe I'm going to wake up everybody in this neighborhood with this freaking no muffler, cheap ass Mustang thing that I got. You know what I mean? And everyone does it now. I can't even imagine what it's like in Indiana.
Well, it's all about a power play, like one, and I'll tell you a quick story about that if you don't mind. One of the first things I'll say about my life growing up, one of my reasons for success is my mom and dad. They're the only thing that's ever made sense to me, and it's a great story. My dad, on Father's Day, when I was 2 years old, played golf. He's an avid golfer, and right around this time, the U.S. Open's actually being played right now. He played around on Father's Day and had a hole-in-one, his only hole-in-one in his career playing golf, and it was on Father's Day. So the point I'm making is, not everybody's fortunate enough to grow up with two parents in the house. I was. I grew up in a place north of Indianapolis. I talked about it with Mike Pence's new house. Like you talk about guys being soft from Parsippany, where I'm from, it's even more soft. Like I grew up in a very good situation, and I empathize with those that weren't steps ahead like I was, because it's an uphill climb.
Yeah, you got lucky. My parents divorced when I was 3. My dad took off when I was 3, and I spent my childhood missing him, living with a mom who had alcoholism and addiction and, did her best to keep it over. My parents had me when I was 9. They were 19 years old, Right. So my mom was still a kid when she was dealing with me. And then alone, no support from my father or anything. I would see my father, like I'd go spend a summer with him and he'd be living in a tent, in Woodstock and stuff. Like I had anything but a traditional childhood. And I missed my father, when I was a kid. I felt that longing until I didn't, until I just didn't care. I haven't talked to 10 years or something like that. I've somebody who's never had like a father in any traditional sense, or that sense of, I don't even know what it's like, like when people are like Father's Day, I'm like, I don't even understand what that's like, because I didn't have that. And a lot of kids you grew up around didn't have it, which is okay. You're lucky that you had that, but you know, you can get by without it. Obviously, I still had family and support and role models and things like that. But, you know, I never had a father around, and I wanted one, you know, but it doesn't work out that way for everybody, you know, and you don't need it. You just need to, you know, the world needs to be a fair place. You know, that's, if you don't have those things, odds are you're in circumstances that you're going to see other people that don't have those things. And if you're lucky enough to escape those circumstances, which I did, you realize two things. A, that you were very lucky, that it could have gone another way, you know, and it's not that everything is easy. I've still had a lot of issues in my life. I'm sober myself. You know, it takes a long time to work through pain, and you fall into a lot of traps yourself when you come out of that. Things like alcoholism and addiction are hereditary, you know. So you know, you can get into trouble, but if you make it out of there, you realize like you're one of the lucky ones, you know, and you realize a lot of people don't in the same circumstance, you know, or they just one bad decision and they don't have a dad. They don't have a mom to bail them out. They don't have a wealthy family. They don't have an education to fall back on, you know. That's how people fall into gangs and violence and drug addiction. And, you know, once you start getting arrested, you're going to probably stay on that track. That's the other thing, you know, with recidivism and all this kind of stuff. Once you start screwing up in life, it's really hard to stop screwing up. Just like once you're poor, it's really hard to not be poor because it's very expensive to be poor. You know, people don't talk about that. It costs a lot of money to be broke. You know, you get charged higher interest rates for everything. You cash your check, you know, at a check cashing place. You know, Jared Kushner, an article came out this week, you know, he's a slumlord and he owns all these, like, you know, slumlord is probably not a great term, but that's basically what he is. He owns all these low income apartment complexes on the East Coast. A lot of them are in Maryland. I lived in one of those places. I don't know if it was Kushner Company, but it was a similar type of thing. I'd come home from school in third grade and people would be evicted. All their stuff would be out in front of their apartments on the street. It happened all the time. I saw it all the time when I'd come home from school, and you were praying it wouldn't be you when you got home that day. You know, that's how I grew up. You know, I would be taking the rent check to the, you know, office and stuff when my mom wasn't around. You know, it was harsh, right? So Kushner takes advantage of those people, and so does his dad, and that's their business, right? But in one of the suits that came out today, this one particular, like, you know, company, company that they own would require all the tenants to pay their rent at a Walmart or a check cashing place. They had to show up in person to pay their rent. So the woman that was in this suit couldn't afford to take a day off from her job, you know, to go pay the rent on this apartment that had rats and mold and all this stuff that she couldn't even move into it. She signed the lease and then it showed up at the apartment and it was so messed up she couldn't even move in, though she continued to pay rent for months, right? And to pay the rent, she'd have to go in person and take time off of work. You know, all that stuff costs you money. You know, wealthy middle-class people don't even realize that, how screwed you get when you're poor. Everything sort of costs more, you know, and we punish the poor. So that stuff's got to end. I think that's enough of an upbeat episode for this week. We're probably well over an hour. It was kind of all over the place this week. So if you're listening to this, we decided not to re-record it. And hope you stick with us. There's a couple of points in there, and you know, it's always real. There's no script in this thing. We just talk about what's on our minds. So that's pretty much it for the week out of me. You got anything else you want to say, Jimmy?
I did put a podcast out this week. Kirby Crochelle. She works with the Crochelle Entertainment Group. So if you're interested in my podcast, you can check it out at jbkonair.com.
Well, there you go, jbkonair.com. And you can catch me on Twitter or on this podcast and in a city near you coming up in the fall. I'm going to be doing some in-person shows. So get ready for that, everybody. I'll throw some jokes in there, I promise. It's not all rants in person, all right? So come on out. I'll let you know more as the months pass. But everybody, you know, start your summer. Let's, you know, I don't think celebrating Juneteenth is the right way to, you know, you're not going to say happy Juneteenth, but, you know, let's celebrate the fact that we're starting to do the right thing and that it is a federal holiday. And for all those that it affects more personally, I hope they have a blessed day tomorrow, and I hope they enjoy it all with their family. And save me a plate because I'm coming to the barbecue if you let me. You know who you are. That's a message for one of our listeners. All right. That's it. Episode 16, Noel Casler podcast. See y'all. Bye.